You are in the temple of the rants, where I rant about whatever my $15 a month plus patrons want me to rant about. You can get one of these by being one of those. This one is for, I cut off his name, Languid Landscape Lad, who says, please rant about The Lord of the Rings. If you haven't seen the movies or read the books, then please rant about how Tolkien's world and setting are often just lazily copied and pasted into a fuck ton of fantasy fiction, whether it be anime or literature. That is kind of disappointing, the way that so much fantasy just seems to go for the exact same stuff. And, like, I don't know enough about fantasy pre-Tolkien to really know, like, if there was a lot of elves and shit in fantasy before that. I mean, I know that it's not as though he made all those things up himself. I believe the elves were a part of Norse mythology. Dwarves, I think, existed beforehand. But what's so great about Tolkien's world building is that, as I understand it, he specialized in language. He studied language. And language, in order to craft a language, you really have to understand the culture that would come up with those words. For instance, what are the priorities of a culture, and what would they think of words for first, so to speak. So if you follow Thaliarchus on Twitter, you'll see him talk a lot about, because he's also a language historian, about how, like, going back through history, if there's a word that you're not sure what it means, it probably means spear, because, like, every society has a word for spear, since it was incredibly important to building societies throughout all of history. So, like, when Tolkien wanted to create his own languages, he thought of the entire history of the universe. He literally starts with a creation myth, creates the, thinks of the whole history of how this world came to be in a very theological way. Like, there's literally a god in this universe that creates these, like, archangel analogs that, have this whole history in a similar way to how a lot of fantasy stories, will approach it. But he did not reverse engineer, I don't think. I think he started from that origin point, created the whole history of the world, and figured out, okay, well, there's going to be one race of people that comes from the mountains. Like, what type of people would make sense there? Well, they'd be shorter, so they could fit in caves, like, they would be, like, how would they evolve on the basis of where they live? What kind of culture would they develop through being in that location? So you have to think all these things through in order to really craft a world that has internal consistency. And granted, there's shortcuts taken. It's not as though he's literally planned out the actual entirety of their history, which is something that is happening every second of every day. But, a simplified version, one where, again, just by virtue of there being a god, it cuts down a lot of the complications of trying to understand how this all evolves, But because you could just say, oh, well, this god built this populace in their image, and they gave them these powers because, but, like, at least there's an explanation, and you can build off of that. So, and that's what the Silmarillion is the book that tells the whole history of, everything leading up to The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, which are more of, like, just a fantasy adventure that takes place in a certain place and time in this world that has this extremely detailed history. And I think that Tolkien did so much work there on that world building that everybody else just looks at it and says, well, I could make up my own thing, but ultimately the archetypes that he created with his different races were so powerful, I think, that people just go in knowing they want to have 6 distinctive fantasy races who each have their own culture. And if you're setting it on something that's similar enough to Earth, there's only so many ideas you really even can come up with, in a way. It's like, if you're going to create a race of people who live inside of a mountain, there's always going to be a dwarves analog. Like, think of the Gorons from The Legend of Zelda. It's like the natural inclination of what you expect from a species of rock-dwelling, mountain people is this certain, like, ruggedness and this certain industriousness, since they have to literally carve tunnels out of mountains, So, and, like, have a relative lack of resources, and so they have to, consume something different or something like that. It's just like there's only so many types of races you can come up with of mountain-dwelling people, and there's not enough variety of landscapes on Earth to have more ideas. So I think that because most fantasy wants to be somewhat Earth-like, they end up sort of defaulting to these same ideas and using the shortcuts of just the cultural understanding of those archetypes that already exists. Whereas it would be much more interesting if somebody did craft a completely unique fantasy world with its own evolutionary history, its own, topography, types of things, but like there's a level at which it becomes less and less relatable to an audience when you start doing that, or even just harder to even imagine. It's like, are we going to have a world where there's no flora, like where we have something else other than plants as a life form, like a new type of life form? Well, I think Mass Effect does a pretty good job of that, and even though you don't really go to any of these fantasy worlds and really explore them in the way that they don't feel that like lived in, but you meet creatures from worlds that do feel very alien. That clearly everything works differently there, and the type of creatures that are from there that even are capable of communicating with humans are so different that communication is difficult and takes a lot of logical steps to be able to accomplish. But yeah, I think that's a series that does an amazing job of coming up with very stuff that's not Tolkien-esque at all, but grounding it when you have a sci-fi setting, you can have humans go and meet these other things. So there's the grounding of a human is there, whereas like say there was a story set entirely in the world of the big like elephant-looking dudes. I don't remember what they're called from Mass Effect. Like, that would be a very difficult story to relate to. It would definitely be like a weird, art house piece, and it wouldn't have nearly as much potential to get huge as Mass Effect does, by having that human connection. So it's understandable that we default to these stereotypes. But as for The Lord of the Rings, I haven't read any of Tolkien's books. I have seen the film trilogy, which I loved. I haven't seen it in a really long time, probably like almost 10 years since I watched all three of them. I remember just thinking that it felt like magic, that it was real. Like that the iconography, the imagery is just unbelievable in parts of the movie. Areas that seem so specific, and I know that's one part New Zealand and one part just insane amounts of computer effects and stuff, but like I'm sure a lot of it would look a lot cheesier to me now. Like a lot of the digital effects wouldn't be as believable with me knowing more about how those things work. But when I saw it when I was like 18 or so, I was definitely like, holy fuck, like how did these even get made? Like how is this possible that these movies can be so detailed and so real feeling that Middle-earth feels like a real place? And of course, there's lots of great characters and great actors and stuff like that. I saw the first Hobbit movie. No, I think I saw the first two. Yeah, I saw the first two. And I remember thinking the first one was pretty okay. And then the second one was just a fucking cock tease, because it ends before the dragon fight. And I knew the third one would just have to open with the dragon fight, and that's the worst way they could have done it. It's the most transparently, like, cash grabby, fucking ridiculous, stupid cliffhanger ending bullshit way. The second movie should have just ended with them killing the dragon and have a big epic scene, and instead it ends with blue balls, and I was very turned off by that, and I heard the third one wasn't that good. Not that I thought the second one was that good, but like, yeah, I just kind of was turned off of it from that point. But I'd be interested in rewatching the Lord of the Rings film trilogy. I did try to read the first book one time, and just the way it's written was so dry, I could not do it. But this is like high school, so I don't know, I could give it another shot. But that's my thoughts on it.